Okay, one more video for the semester, the origins of the Republican Party. This is going to combine a few different things that we've talked about, and maybe not so much in terms of how the Republican Party comes to be, but taking different events and kind of morphing them together to understand where kind of the rationale is coming from behind the growth of this now very popular political party. So one major issue is obviously going to be this unifying factor, and that's going to be slavery. Unlike other political parties, really the Republican Party is the first one to force this issue to the table. They aren't afraid to talk about it. The other political parties, such as the Whigs, the Democrats, they try to avoid confronting the issue. The Free Soilers talk about it, but they don't really make much headway because they're still somewhat limited in what they want to achieve. The Republican Party gets smart and is going to diversify a little bit. So many voters are going to be attracted to this fact because it makes slavery a top concern, but it also has other things to offer up people if they don't care one way or the other about slavery. So the party is formally established in 1854. It's comprised of former Whigs, the Free Soilers, some know-nothings, and unhappy Democrats, mostly Northern Democrats. So supposedly this is the birthplace of the Republican Party. They started in Ripon, Wisconsin, and this is where they had their first meeting. So I guess if you ever go to Ripon, you can find that little house. So the new party is obviously heavily Northern, and you can see this in this nice little chart here about who's voting for who in the 1856 election. And even though the Republicans aren't going to win, they still gather quite a decent percentage of the electoral vote for that first time around. Normally, the people that are going to be in this party don't vote as a one whole unit, which is going to make it unique, and that when they do vote, potentially they have a lot of power, and they start to see that in 1856. This party is clearly a party of the North, but the northern states have that large population, as we talked about in class, because of immigration, because of job opportunities. And so therefore, even though this is a regional party, it's going to make a difference nationally in 1860, which is, we know, Abe Lincoln's election. All right, so the short-term cause is going to be the Kansas-Nebraska Act, but you have to understand there's long-term causes that are going to lead all of these different people to make this final decision. Because if you side with the Republicans, you're ending up siding for a Northern party, and eventually you're going to side with the Democrats. It's a Southern party. So you're going to start to see this shift take place because of these long-term events. So we have the war with Mexico, and the annexation of Texas, as we know, is going to bring about lots of land, which is what's going to make everybody really upset, because whether or not that land is going to be slave or free will be an ongoing debate. You've got the tensions between the Southern Democrats, who are pro-expansionists for the obvious reason of more slave territory, and many Northerners, whether they be Northern Democrats or they are Whigs, they are unhappy with the fact that they could potentially be having other slave states. And there's also that fear of the slaveocracy, which is basically a conspiracy theory, but when you're, back in the 1830s, 40s, and 50s, this didn't seem much like a conspiracy theory, as the fact is that the Southerners were controlling the White House and maintained firm control over the Senate. Therefore, any type of legislation coming through that had to do with stopping slavery wasn't going to get very far. So the war with Mexico. So we talked about a lot, I think, about Manifest Destiny in class and how President Polk wants California. We believe it's that it is our future to control all that land. And even though President Polk's going to offer a decent amount of money to Mexico for it, we know we're going to have to go and basically take it. So many Northerners, especially the Whigs, feel like Polk lied, and therefore tried to convince a lot of congressmen that we were not the ones agitating for the fight. So a few brave men, such as Abe Lincoln, are going to stand up to him, but they are definitely in the minority when you've got a generation of people that haven't fought a war and they believe they need to prove themselves, and just they believe that they've been attacked, that they are willing to believe the president, so war is basically inevitable. Many Southerners, because they fought in the war, there just happened to be many in the Army at the time, believed that any new land that we were to get would have been slave states automatically. The abolitionists are against, obviously, adding more land and just extending slavery. But again, if you're an abolitionist, you're not necessarily, or all Northerners are not abolitionists. So just because you're a Northerner doesn't make you an abolitionist. But you could be anti-slave because, again, you don't want to see competition encroaching in on the free whites' jobs. So there's an abolitionist view about this, about the slaveocracy, but there's also the Northern view that slavery is going to impinge on the freedoms of the white men. So the treaty that will be controversial, Guadalupe Hidalgo, this is going to give us more land than the Louisiana Purchase, which if you think about it, that's pretty darn amazing. So the pro-slavery supporters are thinking, great, this is all going to be for us. Most of this is south of that magical Missouri Compromise line. And Northerners are thinking, not so fast here. We're not really feeling very comfortable with this. This isn't what we bargained for. So at this point, the Whigs actually have control of the House, and they are trying to advocate to at least slow down and let's have this conversation about extending slavery. We know that Senator Wilmot, I think he's a senator, is going to offer up what we are going to call the Wilmot Proviso that will make it a law that any land achieved in this war with Mexico will be free. So we know this gets past the House twice, but it cannot get past the Senate because of that supposed slaveocracy of having equal amount of senators for the southern states and the northern states. So we know that the Wilmot Proviso is not going to be, but the fact that it's been put out there and it's been talked about that we don't want to see slavery extend. So the next big event will be the Compromise of 1850, which is, of course, an extension of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo because it's definitely dealing with all of that territory. The compromise clearly favors the North because the North is going to win out in that the North gets California is a huge free state. Texas is going to give up some of its land to New Mexico, which will eventually be a free territory. And the slave trade is going to end in D.C., which is what many abolitionists want. Again, maybe not the Northerners don't care, but abolitionists do care. The South, their big thing was popular sovereignty, which they do have access or they do have the ability to use in New Mexico and Utah, but it's never really going to change anything there. They're still going to be free territories. But more importantly will be the fugitive slave law, which they felt that the slave law that was on the books was not being enforced. And this is a much harsher slave law, and so the North would have to support it. The reality is that the Northerners are shocked by this slave law and what it means, and that there is no fair trial. And if you're going to no longer allow these alleged runaways, maybe the right to a fair trial, what potentially would be stopping the government from doing the same for anybody else. So that was a big fear for them. Now, what will immediately wake people up and make a lot of people make instant decisions will be the Kansas-Nebraska Act. So the prior things I talked about, those are long-term clauses that force people to think about things on and off. They're kind of boiling in the background to them. But what really is going to upset a lot of people immediately will be the Kansas-Nebraska Act. So as you can see by the cartoon, many people are going to feel like slavery is being kind of jammed down their throats by that slaveocracy. So, and the cartoon's pretty intense. You see the man way in the background being lynched. You see, obviously, the kind of very, large giant man being tied down or held down so that slavery can be pushed down his throat. And he's supposed to portray a free soiler, so just an everyday average Joe Schmo farmer being forced to have to compete with now slave labor. So lots of people are angry with Senator Douglas, who, if you recall, is an Illinois senator who had bought land in Chicago for the hopes that that would be the home of the transcontinental rail line. So he had to convince the South to give the North that line, and he thought he could give them potentially new territory north of that magical Missouri Compromise line, and that way he could get what he wants. So this is where people start to see this is a betrayal of the Missouri Compromise, which had kept the peace for a very long time, over 30 years. So many men don't want to see slavery extend into the territory, and they feel like this is just being forced down their throats. So new parties are going to be created. Really, the Republican Party is the party that will be created, and others are going to be leaving their party because of this act.